Shalom, shalom, shalom. Once again, I am back after, wow, it feels like forever since I've been recording and sending out messages. But this installment has taken me some time, but finally it is prepped and ready, locked and loaded to fire. We have so much going on within the UK as is going on around the world. The whole of the UK is relaxing its COVID restrictions, and we're once again beginning to enjoy our freedoms, enjoy the sun, enjoy being out in the greenery of nature and having fellowship with our mishpacha, where we're now meeting outdoors once again. But the world is still in a very uncertain phase as to, are we already headed back into a third wave? According to media reports, we are already seeing the early stages of the third wave. The UK is now up to 60 million vaccinations. Yes, that's right. 60 million people have taken at least the first dose / second dose of the vaccinations for COVID. And now we're even seeing exposure on Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has been caught lying to Congress. And so that is all coming out in the media. So there is a lot going on right now in the world concerning this pandemic. But we know that Yahushua HaMashiach sits on the throne, and prophecy is being fulfilled even right now, that people are being sealed all around the world as to which way they have chosen to go and who is their Elohim. As for me and my house, we will serve Yahuwah. Ahavah Fellowship stands strong on the word and stands strong in the knowledge of Yahuwah, protecting his global child, his global son, Yisrael. Hallelujah. So we are busying ourselves in the work of the ministry. And I've got part 4, as I said before, ready to fire off to you. I'm looking forward to sharing this revelation with you and this teaching as we prepare for part 5. Episode 5 will be the conclusive episode on this series before I move on to my next series, and I know you'll enjoy this conclusion. Anyway, enough from me. Ensure you've subscribed, check out the ministry, and if you feel led to, please do support. We appreciate everyone's hands to the building of the temple, the Mishkan, for everyone to be edified and built up. I'll see you on the other side. Shalom. As I sit in front of my computer, writing the concluding transcript for this series, which in my opinion has been an extremely controversial and tendacious retelling of the historicity of the modern Jewish people, I find myself reflecting on the journey of my own people, my own walk, and my own spiritual beliefs. And through that lens, I see and empathize with the plight of any peoples desirous of seeking to secure their freedoms, national ideals, and recognition from the rest of humanity as to their right to exist. As an educated, conscious Hebrew of Caribbean descent, raised among a people who have struggled to survive under extreme oppression from an empire born on the backs of enslaved peoples, the United Kingdom is responsible for the enslavement and subjugation of hundreds of millions of people spanning multiple continents. No single empire is more responsible for global transfer of wealth, sovereignty, natural resources, both human and otherwise, than the British Empire, through its tyranny of dehumanization, justified by man's greed for capitalism. It is this pursuit for independence, recognition of values, sovereignty, autonomy, and earnest desire for equal humanitarian rights that drives men and women to become significant figures in their communities, their nation, and some go on to be immortalized in history. In this installment, we shall look at one such figure who pretty much surfaces the moment we excavate the foundations to the question as to who are the Jewish people. Theodor Herzl, an Austro-Hungarian Jewish journalist, playwright, political activist, and writer who is considered by most to be the father of modern political Zionism. Born to a non-religious secular Jewish family, his defining moment would arrive as a journalist reporting in France on the Dreyfus Affair. This historic debacle of justice in the French Supreme Court would ignite and divide the French citizens over the evident anti-Semitism that prevented justice from being served. This caused irreparable damage to the fabric of French society that we still see the tatters of to this very day. Herzl, now inflamed with new ideals after witnessing this miscarriage of justice, surmised that the Jewish peoples would continue to suffer reoccurring ordeals of this nature, and the only solution to the matter would be the immediate provision of a safe place for Jewish peoples to call their own lands, in order to prevent them being treated as aliens and second-class citizens without due and fair rights. It is important to note that Herzl's Jewish ideals were not founded or motivated in any part by a zeal to honor and uphold the Hebrew Scriptures. His vision was never to be a religious figurehead pioneering a restoration to the biblical Holy Land, but rather to obtain for the Jewish people their own homeland, anywhere in the world, as a people free from oppression. In 1896, Herzl would publish in Leipzig, Germany, and Vienna, Austria, his pamphlet entitled, in German, Der Judenstaat. It literally means the Jews' state. The pamphlet had, however, another subtitle that many omit to draw attention to, Versuch einer modernen Lösung der Judenfrage, meaning proposal of a modern solution for the Jewish question. However, I find it rather interesting that it was originally called Address to the Rothschilds, referring to the Rothschild family banking dynasty. Herzl's intentions were clear: to garner support from the wealthy and powerful banking elite families to secure his vision of a Jewish-controlled state. In Herzl's own words, the Jews are one people, and their plight could be transformed into a positive force by the establishment of a Jewish state with the consent of the great powers. End quote. To whom was Herzl referring to as the great powers? Civil rights leaders, statesmen, monarchy, or was this a move to court the attentions of global elites that live in the shadows, with enough power and more than enough experience in shaping and controlling global governments, laws, and international policies, and above all, the control of world banks? Baron Edmund de Rothschild entertained and rejected Herzl's roadmap for a solution to the Jewish question, surmising it would jeopardize other Jewish interests around the world, not least of all the interests of the Rothschild banking mogul family. So too, Baron Hirsch also rejected Herzl's ideals. Nonetheless, at 36 years of age, Herzl had published his milestone Judenstaat, and modern-day political Zionism was all the same born. Herzl's many attempts to garner supporters would eventually pay off in 1897. The first annual Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland. To Herzl's delight, he exclaimed, "At Basel, I founded the Jewish state." He was just 37 years of age. Initially, Herzl had suggested that all Jews should convert to Christianity in order to flee persecution by those favoring a Catholic or Protestant disposition. His apparent lack of religious zeal and spiritual identity no doubt influenced his decision to abstain from circumcising his only son. According to the customs of the Semites of Scripture, all descendants of Abraham were to be circumcised. This is a very significant point, one not to be overlooked, as it gives a great deal of insight into the man, his motivation for creating a Jewish state, and just how he identified himself as a Jew. Circumcision to the Jew is the definitive mark of their identity. A true Jew, according to Scripture, is to be circumcised in order to have the blessings afforded to Abraham. Herzl clearly had little regard for the Tanakh, aka the Bible, during the course of his own life. Its commandments, laws, and prophecies were all subjective to his own experience and worldview. What began within his parental home remained a void in his life. Herzl chose not to rear his children in this way. Herzl's vision of founding a future independent Jewish state during the 20th century begs question to just how did he envision the future of the Jewish people? Was it to be independent of the framework of Torah? Herzl argued in his works entitled Alt Newland, meaning Old New Land, published in 1902, 6 years after Der Judenstaat, that the best way to avoid anti-Semitism in Europe was to create an independent Jewish state. In his books, he defines terms such as mutualism, which essentially is patterned on a liberal and egalitarian social welfare model, a mixed economy with public ownership of the land and natural resources. Alt Newland steers away from any form of theocracy. The temple, which ought to be the center of Jewish life, is reduced to a mere synagogue and relocated so as not to offend the religious Muslims, therefore establishing peace with the Arab neighbors. This was Herzl's new Jewish state. One, for obvious reasons, would inflame the religious Jews, who are devoutly observant to the Torah, as it is the heart of their Jewish identity.
Our fight is not with guns. Our fight is to wake up people and to make them think. We believe strongly that the state of Israel will come to an end. We have God on our side.
The book encouraged Jews to purchase land in Palestine, although the potential of a Jewish state elsewhere in the world was also seriously considered. Herzl popularized the term Zionism, and his nationalistic movement culminated in the birth of the State of Israel in 1948. But Zionism continues to be connected with political support for Israel. What is Zionism? Zionism is first and foremost a geopolitical ideology that quickly became a sanction for ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinian population. In actual fact, Zionism functioned more like colonialism. Many critics challenged what right does the Israeli government have to raise buildings to the ground and build settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. The Zionist cause is not founded upon the authority of Holy Scripture, but purely upon one man's ideals that soon garnered the attentions of powerful oligarchs who would champion Herzl's cause for their own agendas. Israeli historian Professor Ilan Pappé argued in his 2006 book entitled The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, and I quote, "Zionist leaders were well aware that implementing their solution would necessitate ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinian population." End quote. In 1948, the Palestinian Exodus, as it is referred to, saw the forced displacement of 720,000 Arabs out of 900,000 were expelled from their homes by the Zionist movement under the authority of David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel. Israeli historian Professor Shlomo Sand, in his book The Invention of the Jewish People, writes about the cause of Zionism and its effects on the indigenous peoples. And I quote, "Dominated by Zionism's particular concept of nationality, the State of Israel still refuses, 60 years after its establishment, to see itself as a republic that serves its citizens. 1/4 of the citizens are not categorized as Jews, and the laws of the state imply that Israel is not their state, nor do they own it. The state has also avoided integrating the local inhabitants into the superculture it has created, and has instead deliberately excluded them. Israel has also refused to be a consocial democracy like Switzerland or Belgium, or a multicultural democracy like Great Britain or the Netherlands. That is to say, a state that accepts its diversity while serving its inhabitants. Instead, Israel insists on seeing itself as a Jewish state belonging to all the Jews in the world, even though they are no longer persecuted refugees, but full citizens of the countries in which they choose to reside. The excuse for this grave violation of a basic principle of modern democracy and for the preservation of an unbridled ethnocracy that grossly discriminates against certain of its citizens rests on the active myth of an eternal nation that must ultimately foregather in its ancestral land." Close quote. It may interest the viewer to know that during the production of this message, as if to confirm the timing of the Ruach for my releasing this particular message as part 4 in my series, as of April 2021, over 100 black Torah-keeping Hebrew Israelites who have lived in the Dimona community of Israel for over 50 years, contributing to every facet of Jewish culture and society. They have lived a peaceful existence in harmonizing with the local community and not having posed any threat to Jewish life and society, have been issued deportation notices to leave the country within a matter of weeks. Israel was never a home of the brave and a land of the free, but only for those who look like the present-day concept of a Jewish person. Wonder Woman star Gal Gadot waded into the debate over what it means to be Israeli after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "The country is the homeland only of the Jewish people." "Love thy neighbor," the Israeli actress said on Instagram, where she has 28.3 million followers. "It is not a matter of right or left, Arabs or Jews, secular or religious." She added, "It is a matter of dialogue for peace and of our tolerance for each other. It is our responsibility to shine hope and light for a better future for our children." This is something Jewish people, as well as anyone, should be vehemently opposed to seeing, as Nazi Germany sought to annihilate them as a people and steal their possessions and property. In 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister of Israel at that time, then head of the World Zionist Organization, proclaimed the founding of the State of Israel. Ideals became policy and vision became reality. What is the land and what is the state of Israel? The land of Israel is very biblical, and its history is as old as the Bible itself, predating the advent of Islam and many of the world's nations that exist today. It is the land given to Abraham by the Most High for his descendants through Isaac and Jacob to populate. However, the State of Israel is a very different intellectual property. The modern State of Israel is listed as a liberal democratic government with a parliamentary system and a prime minister holding the high seat of power over the land and its government, the Knesset. The Knesset is a very different government from that of the biblical Israel, which was a theocracy, and its rule of law governed its ruling council, the Sanhedrin. Its legislation and constitution were the Torah, given by the Most High himself. In time, kings were established upon the petitions of the people who desired a king in place of Yahuwah. Israel is a kingdom and has sovereignty over itself. Yahushua is its king, and he establishes righteous kings to rule over his constituents. We will see that day return, but for now, this is the time of men, and they shall reign until the Prince of Peace comes to establish his new kingdom, a new world order, if you will. Is the current location of Israel the first choice of homeland for the Zionist movement? It may surprise many to learn that the land of Israel was never the primary choice. Neither was it on the Zionist shortlist for a Jewish homeland. The Zionists had other much preferred choices to resolve the Jewish question at hand. The land options for the World Zionist Organization put forward by the World Zionist Congress. In 1903, the British Uganda program saw England offering Mao Plateau in Kenya to the Zionist Congress. It was accepted unanimously, but upon reconnoitering the land, they were beset by lions and the Maasai tribe's warriors who did not take kindly to European invaders, having learned their lessons from previous peaceful incursions, no doubt. In 1928, Russia offered territory to the Jewish people to have an autonomous state. So too, throughout the early 20th century, plans such as the Fugu Plan of Japan and Madagascar Plan of British Guyana, even the famed Beit Israel of Ethiopia, were to be given neighbors by the Italian government that had seized control of that area to plant the European Jewish peoples in the West or Ethiopia. However, Mussolini's plan was never implemented, as racial tensions between blacks and whites would have led to greater conflict, as blacks would suffer under strict racial segregation laws, and undoubtedly a Star Wars-like resistance would have ensued against the advances of a looming empire. Dozens of other countries were seriously petitioned to offer land, such as Argentina and Australia, for the provision of the Jewish state and homeland. Eventually, the land commonly referred to as Palestine, but biblically Israel, was placed on the negotiation table. The rest is therefore history. Lionel Walter de Rothschild would then secure the deal through his powerful arm, arranging for the British Crown to gift the land in Palestine to the Rothschild family, and so the State of Israel was born. Note, the wording stated in and not the land of Palestine. It was always intended for a Jewish state to cohabit and not evict the Palestinians. Why are so many Orthodox Jews up in arms against Zionism? For many years, members of the Orthodox communities of London and Jerusalem have organized protests not for, but actually against the State of Israel and against the agenda of the Zionist Party movement. Why? After all, isn't Zionism a good thing for all Jewish peoples? To go straight to the heart of the furor of this, we need to look no further than the Jewish Talmud. The Talmud, the central text of rabbinic Judaism and the primary source of Jewish religious law, contains within its volumes the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a biblical exegesis by ancient Judaic authorities using a mode of interpretation called Midrash. The rabbis are up in arms, as the Midrash of the Talmud forbids the creation of a Jewish state until the Mashiach comes, and he establishes the land, government, and the kingdom of Israel for himself. The words of the prophets accord with this. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. Dominion, government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be given the name Pele Yoetz, El Gibor, Avi Ad, Sar Shalom, Wonder of a Counselor, Mighty God, Father of Eternity, Prince of Peace, in order to extend the dominion and perpetuate the peace of the throne and kingdom of David, to secure it and sustain it through justice and righteousness, henceforth and forever. The zeal of Yahuwah Zavaot will accomplish this. Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 9, verses 5 through 6. It is presumption on the part of those who think they can somehow facilitate the strong hand of the Most High and do for themselves what only He Himself said He would do. Any attempt to strong-arm the Most High or to think to preempt Him will only result in an undoing of themselves, as they presume to know the way of the Most High. Only His appointed and anointed Prince can establish His kingdom, and indeed his chosen people on earth. On this point, the Bible and the Talmud are in absolute agreement. The nation of Israel can only really be a nation under the king that Yahuwah himself places on its throne. Unto him will all the nations pay obeisance. Unto him will all the tribes of Israel return. Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, or the Protocols of the Meetings of the Learned Elders of Zion, is denounced as a fabricated anti-Semitic text purporting to describe a Jewish plan for global domination. Whether you believe it or not, the point is Herzl did, and he had no reservations on quoting from its annals. The darker side of Herzl. As outlined in his diaries, Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, sought to deliberately inflame anti-Semitism following the perception of Jews declared in the Protocols. He wrote, and I quote, "The wealthy Jews control the world. In their hands lies the fate of the governments and nations. They set governments one against the other, and by their decree, governments make peace. When the wealthy Jews play, the nations and the rulers dance. One way or the other, they get rich." Herzl suggested, quote, "Indeed, anti-Semitism, a powerful and deep-rooted strength of mass subconsciousness, will not harm the Jews. I find it helps build the Jewish character, group edification of the masses, and education good for bringing about its assimilation. The assimilation is achieved only through troubles. The Jews will adapt." Close quote. He therefore concluded, "An excellent idea enters my mind: to attract outright anti-Semites and make them destroyers of Jewish wealth." Protocols of Zion. No doubt, Herzl sees the oppression of the Jewish peoples as the catalyst for them to change, adopt his plans, or face annihilation. Without question, Theodor Herzl had very powerful Masonic connections that led him from relative obscurity to becoming a global influencer with powerful allies, content on making him the figurehead of a global movement. The telltale signs are all over the Jewish state. One has only but to look behind the veil to see who are the real puppet masters of the state of Israel. Is there any doubt as to who are the learned elders of Zion? Let us revisit the term he used when referring to those that could help him achieve the gargantuan task of repatriating millions of Jews to a new homeland in a country that was not theirs. Who would have such power, money, and control to pull such strings? Keep in mind, Herzl was not a man disposed to religion. In his own words, he said he would need to enlist the help of the great powers. In this world, that is a very short list of contenders. The suckerings and hook-filled tentacles of Freemasonry have slithered their way into every institution known to man. In 1897, Theodor Herzl declared, "In Basel, I established the Jewish state. If I were to say it publicly today, the response would be laughter from all directions. Perhaps in another 5 years, 50 years at the most, everyone will recognize it." Close quote. As if miraculously, dare I say, Masonically, 50 years later, exactly as Herzl predicted, the State of Israel was inaugurated in 1948, in spite of Herzl being deceased some 44 years prior. Was it precision planning, or did he have helpers powerful enough to ensure those plans were fulfilled exactly as he had stated? In Herzl's book, Alt Newland, two travelers, during their visits to and from an island in the Pacific, stop over in the land of Palestine. Friedrich Lohenberg and his aristocrat friend named Kingscourt observe huge transformations in the land, an establishment of a liberal government to rule the nation through philosophy as much as egalitarianism, rapid expansion of infrastructure, growth of industry and technology in the areas of agriculture, medicine, politics, and so forth. Herzl's blueprint for the Jewish state was laid out in his book Alt Newland. His vision of a Jewish state that quickly rises to become a major player on the world stage, leading the way in every sphere of society imaginable. It is fair to say that Israel, in its desire for independence, certainly has risen from strength to strength to become a world leader, exactly as Herzl had envisioned it, almost literally following the blueprint of his book. Regardless of what anyone may think, the ideal that a man may have a vision and desire for his people, and that vision should manifest to the scale of which we see today. The Jewish people in the land of Israel is truly a feat of divine providence. Few men can attest to have instigated something so monumental and it come to pass in such a short period of time. It is truly every visionary's dream come true, and for that I admire the man. The visionary, however his dream came to pass, his life's purpose, at least from Herzl's perspective, was fulfilled. That is something I wish every man and woman, that we would live our lives on purpose and see all our hopes and dreams come to fruition. The following is an excerpt from Herzl's pamphlet entitled Der Judenstaat, the Jewish State, released in Leipzig and Vienna. The idea I have developed in this pamphlet is an ancient one. It is the restoration of the Jewish state. The decisive factor is our propelling force. And what is that force? The plight of the Jews. I am profoundly convinced that I am right, though I doubt whether I shall live to see myself prove so. Those who today inaugurate this movement are unlikely to live to see its glorious culmination. But the very inauguration is enough to inspire in them a high pride and the joy of an inner liberation of their experience. The plan would seem mad enough if a single individual were to undertake it, but if many Jews simultaneously agree on it, it is entirely reasonable, and its achievement presents no difficulties worth mentioning. The idea depends only on the number of its adherents. Perhaps our ambitious young men, to whom every road of advancement is now closed, and for whom the Jewish state throws open a bright prospect of freedom, happiness, and honor, perhaps they will see to it that this idea is spread. It depends on the Jews themselves whether this political document remains for the present a political romance. If this generation is too dull to understand it rightly, a future, finer, more advanced generation will arise to comprehend it. The Jews who will try it shall achieve their state, and they will deserve it. I consider the Jewish question neither a social nor a religious one. Even though it sometimes takes these and other forms, it is a national question, and to solve it, we must first of all establish it as an international political problem to be discussed and settled by the civilized nations of the world in council. We are a people, one people. We have sincerely tried everywhere to merge into the national communities in which we live, seeking only to preserve the faith of our fathers. It is not permitted us. In vain are we loyal patriots, sometimes super loyal. In vain do we make the same sacrifices of life and property as our fellow citizens. In vain do we strive to enhance the fame of our native lands in the arts and sciences, or her wealth by trade and commerce. In our native lands, where we have lived for centuries, we are still decried as aliens, often by men whose ancestors had not yet come at a time when Jewish sighs had long been heard in the country. Oppression and persecution cannot exterminate us. No nation on earth has endured such struggles and sufferings as we have. Jew baiting has merely winnowed out our weaklings. The strong among us defiantly return to their own whenever persecution breaks out. Wherever we remain politically secure for any length of time, we assimilate. I think this is not praiseworthy. Palestine is our unforgettable historic homeland. Let me repeat once more my opening words. The Jews who will it shall achieve their state. We shall live at last as free men on our own soil and in our own homes, peacefully dying. The world will be liberated by our freedom, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness, and whatever we attempt there for our own benefit will redound mightily and beneficially to the good of all mankind. Well, I most certainly enjoyed delivering part 4, but I can tell you right now, I'm already preparing for the ultimate climax to this series. Part 5 is gonna be explosive and rock the house. So please make sure you do subscribe to the Ahavah Fellowship YouTube channel, where we have so much content that is just geared to edify the body and teach you all to the rich Hebraic roots of the word of Yahuwah. Well, until next time, Shalom.